She's the founder of the national nonprofit Changelab Solutions, where she served as CEO for nearly 25 years and pioneered the use of law and policy to solve complex problems related to public health inequities. She is deeply committed to mentoring students as they tackle complex structural inequities and explore social justice lawyering. Marice.
It's particularly amazing because when I graduated from undergraduate school, I knew I did not want to be a lawyer. And even when I was at what was then Bolt Hall, I kept telling my faculty advisor, but I don't really want to be a lawyer. And in many ways, I wasn't a traditional lawyer the way people practice with firms or anything like that. My practice was very different. But before I get into what I wanted to say, a little bit of factoid. So we used to have a Bolt Hall Women's Association. I think this is now Women in Berkeley Law, We had what's classroom 10 was the women's lounge. And we were cleaning it out one time with file cabinets and all of it. And it turns out that the Women's Association started as the Bolt Hall Wives Club because there weren't any women in law school, and the wives had a support group, I guess, the way women will do to survive their husbands. So I just pass that on because I don't know where any of this is written down, but I happen to know it because I found it. So now you all know it too, so you can pass it now. So we started getting complaints. This was the first year, I was a class of 93, that the women just barely outnumbered the men in law school. So it was part of this big sea change. And the men got upset that there was a women's lounge and not a men's lounge. Like, why did women get this special treatment? And so one of my classmates had just had a baby, so we took off, we added onto the door of what it said women's lounge and lactation center. So just a little bit of how it all worked way back when. I want to talk about three things. Kind of what I've learned. I'm mostly retired now, and I'm teaching as kind of really a capstone of my career, and that's how it feels to me. A commitment to lifelong learning, and that's kind of the main thing that I'm going to talk about, and the importance of mentoring leaders, which I love doing, and I hope and I know you all will be in that situation someday too. So I'm going to use a little bit of rude language, which is when I got my butt kicked. And I've gotten my butt kicked a lot over the years. And never feels good at the time, but such tremendous learning and so much creativity that comes out of those down moments like, oh my God, what the hell am I going to do now? So I want to talk about how this progressed and why it's important and what are we facing now as women in this country today, because just a spoiler alert, we're getting our butts kicked now, and what are we going to do about it? And that's the call to action that I'm going to leave you with. So I went to the University of Notre Dame undergraduate school and started in a public interest with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, it's called, and you work in poverty communities and do social service. And my job was working with churches all throughout Los Angeles County on the Nestle boycott. Nestle was selling infant formula, particularly in Africa, and telling mothers, they had women who were basically pharmaceutical detail people, dressed in white with little white hats that they looked like nurses, telling mothers that if they really cared about their babies and they wanted to be a modern mother and blah, 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 they would be using infant formula instead of breastfeeding. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of babies died. First of all, the women were poor, they were illiterate, they couldn't read the instructions, the water was contaminated, the babies weren't getting the natural immunity through the breast milk, and they were starving to death, literally starving to death. And the World Health Organization asked Nestle to stop, and it wouldn't. It would put profits over the lives of tens of thousands of babies and the entire families. So the World Health Organization joined the World Council of Churches and boycotted, did an international boycott of the Nestle Corporation, which was very successful. And that was my introduction to public health. How could it be that there would be corporations earning money over the deaf and disability. That brought me to the School of Public Health here in Berkeley. I was in the class of '84 at public health school, and kind of launched my career. I was trained as a community organizer, a public health community organizer, there is such a thing, to work with communities to understand how you create health within a community. I worked with the Contra Costa Health Department, so people who aren't here, Contra Costa is just north of us a little bit. And it's a really interesting place, but my job was to take on another corporate entity, and this time it was tobacco control. There's 17 cities in Contra Costa County, and then the county itself is another independent government agency. We were the first place in the world, and we did door-to-door, dog and pony show, city by city by city, to have smoke-free indoor air. I promise you, if this was 1984, 1985, there'd be ashtrays at all these tables. I was a pack-a-day smoker myself, not then, I quit before public health school, but I smoked. Everybody, I mean, and women smoking, it was becoming the leading cause of death in women. Lung cancer it was exceeding breast cancer as the cause of death of women right at that time. At least 60% of you would be, an after-dinner cigarette is what you would be doing now. And the idea of clean indoor air and the rights of non-smokers, we had no idea that this would become an international phenomenon. But it started in Contra Costa County. It started with grassroots community organizers, the organizations like the American Cancer Society and others that had a lot of credibility with doctors and all of that. But it was grassroots people saying, and the leader of the coalition was a mayor in a small town out there whose husband, who was an airline pilot, died from secondhand smoke. He was a non-smoker. And this idea that corporations were making money by promoting products that they knew would kill people if used as directed was kind of shocking to people. And it was before any of what we take for granted now. So hold on to that idea about tobacco control, because I will come back to it. I moved from tobacco control into environmental justice, and Contra Costa County was one of the ground zeros of the environmental justice movement. Richmond, North Richmond, the Chevron facility, there are lots of petrochemical facilities. And my job as a liaison between the health department and the community-based organizations kind of organizing for their health and well-being. And this was the first time I got my butt kicked. I didn't know legislation, regulation, what's a statute, and how does this all work, and how do you figure out, I didn't feel like I could do the kind of public health or community organizing that I was trained to do and I wanted to do. So that fear of being a fool and not knowing what I was doing was not pleasant, but it got me into law school. It was, I want to stay in public health, but I need to have better tools. How does this work? How do you put a strategy together that's going to be effective when you've got Chevron and the whole Western States petroleum industry? It was kind of a nightmare, and I didn't know what to do. And I just didn't even know the basics of how things work and what should happen. So I came to law school, and I learned some of that. And what came out of this, as the introduction said, was Changelab Solutions. What we're designed to do is to demystify the law so grassroots community organizers could use it, have it in their hands, be empowered by it. It was never the lawyers out front. It was always the community out front. And I want to tell you a story about it, because our first big funding came from the California Department of Public Health. We passed this ordinance in Contra Costa, it came to Alameda County where we are now, it went to San Francisco, getting stronger and better the whole way. Then it goes down to LA County, 87 cities, boom, 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 boom. Before we knew it, the whole state was smoke-free. It snowballed into a statewide, and then from California, literally to the rest of the world. When I was in law school, the same coalitions passed a big tax on cigarette products. And part of that money was dedicated to community organizing on tobacco control. Brilliant. If ever you're in a position to allocate resources like this, make sure you're going into prevention. We have already heard about prevention of the disease, whether it's domestic violence or lung cancer or anything like that. Those dollars came to us at Changelab Solutions, and we developed model laws and policies, put everything up on the website, and did technical assistance for community-based organizations. So at the time, has anybody studied the Lorillard v. Riley case? It's a big commercial speech case. At the time, we were getting rid of billboards, tobacco billboards in California, and it was never the lawyers going and arguing we had 44 cities who had gotten rid of tobacco billboards. And this was a time of Joe Camel, and youth smoking rates were going skyrocketing because he was this kind of phallic cartoon character that was really appealing to teenagers, designed brilliantly to target teenagers. So Boys and Girls Clubs were the place where the organizing happened. And these Boys and Girls Clubs would do what I would call barefoot epidemiology. This was before cell phones or GIS or anything like that. They just had maps of their community. And they would pinpoint all the different tobacco billboards and show that what was the race of the people in the billboard, what language was it in in Spanish or English, what were people doing, playing music, they were doing sports. So they did all this, learning about their community, learned about advertising and tobacco-related diseases, and then went to the rich communities and did the same thing. There aren't any billboards in rich communities. That does not happen. Their maps were empty. And then they were trained to speak truth to power. So we had done all the legal work, and I have to say thank you to Steve Sugarman, who passed away a year ago. He worked closely with us from day one. He brought in Robert Post, probably the most preeminent First Amendment scholar in the country, who was at Bolt Hall, Berkeley Law at the time, and other academics who worked with us, and we put together a model and trained the teenagers to use it. Every city they worked with passed a tobacco billboard ordinance. Lorillard v. Riley came along, none of you studied it, it doesn't matter, got rid of all our work. Got rid of all of our work. It invalidated the ability to control commercial speech that way. We don't have tobacco billboards because of the master settlement agreement, another whole story. We got our butt kicked. This was all of our work at the time, and we were on a roll. We were going for the same snowball effect. First California, and then it would go around the country like it had before. Our butt kicked. We had to learn, all right, if we can't regulate speech, how can we regulate business conduct? So I know this is going to be a shocking story to you, but it is the truth. It used to be you'd go into like a corner store, and here's the counter. Everything down below the counter was cigarettes, always cigarettes. Because any 12, 10, 14-year-old who would come in and steal cigarettes, the merchant would get reimbursed by the tobacco companies. The merchant didn't care if the kids stole cigarettes. It was like, how do you get the next generation addicted to cigarettes? You make sure it's easy for them to pilfer and smoke, and they feel so cool and so great and whatever, and boom, they're addicted. So putting your tobacco products in front is conduct. It's business conduct, not speech. So one of the early things we learned is, let's get the tobacco products behind the counter. These are called self-service displays. We have those banned. You've got now, if you buy cigarettes, you have to theoretically show your ID. This was all teenagers doing, every single step of this, not the lawyers. So the kick butt moment put us into a whole new way of working. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation came to us and said, okay, we're about to put $1 billion with the B into what they called at the time childhood obesity prevention. We want you to do for the nation what you've done for California and tobacco control. Model laws and policies, how-to toolkits, training grassroots advocates to change the law. This is before we used language like structural determinants of health or structural racism, this structure, but we knew that we had such great outcomes in tobacco control, let's do the same thing. Would you take on the fast food and beverage industry? So Nestle was like going full circle for me in that regard. And we did that. We did model laws and policies. It was great work. Michelle Obama, she made that the centerpiece of her First Lady work. And it was a national dialogue all over the place. But we also got our butt kicked. We realized, and I remember the day specifically, we would get together as a cohort, a team of public health and advocacy experts, and we were in Philadelphia. We get together every 6 months. And it was the first time it was a Black Lives Matter protest in Philadelphia. This was in the, not the current movement, but the mid-aughts. And I had to took a taxi from the train station to the other side of town where the hotel was, and everybody who was there had come through. And my life was not the same. We cannot be saying to communities, childhood obesity, as if this is a major problem that communities are facing. It is not the major problem. And it was so obvious. Now we use the words of the social determinants of health, the structural determinants of health. Public health agencies all over the country are declaring racism as a public health crisis. We couldn't do business as usual anymore. And the whole work of Changelab Solutions changed. Now all of the work is centered on racial equity and economic justice. All of the work is building up the voices, particularly of the communities who haven't had a voice, and showing them the tools and paths that they can use. One of my favorite moments of life was I was at a conference and I'm in the back of the room and there's a panel up front, and one of the people on the panel was a tenant organizer in Cleveland. And so I raised my hand to ask a question. I said, I'm Marice Ashe, I'm with Changelab Solutions. Changelab Solutions, we use your stuff all the time. The city says, no, we can't do this, we can't do that. Yes, you can, right here, here's a model ordinance, and I know how to use it. And that was the goal, is how do you put the community voice at the forefront, but armed with the power of the law right behind them in plain English so they can use it. So with that butt kick movement, all of Changelab Solutions changed. The work is deeper, it's better. It's in an organization now since I've left, and after the pandemic now it's surging. The work is now, as we all know. I want to say that we are still getting our butt kicked. And I want to say that to every single person in this room, and most particularly the women. 1 year ago, the Dobbs decision. And I don't presume anybody shares my beliefs around abortion rights or anything like that. All of that aside, half the population have just lost a fundamental liberty. I mean, my public health law class this year is all women, amazingly, and teaching this decision for the first time with all women of childbearing age, and I'm no longer one of those women, but I mean, my God, we do not have a fundamental liberty to bodily autonomy, which is unheard of, and this is a butt-kicking moment for all of us. In March of this year, a few weeks ago, there was a decision, Rahimi, coming out of Texas, because of a decision in Dobbs. They said, you know, there's this historic, deeply rooted historic tradition wasn't abortion, so it can't be now. In Rahimi, it was gun control, and to our points about domestic violence, Texas had a law that if you have, if you're a perpetrator of violence, you can't have a gun. And no, gun ownership is deeply rooted. And men used to beat their wives all the time. Therefore, this law was struck down. Today, this week, the Mifepristone case, the absurdity of that case, the reading of it, again, taking away essential medicine from women by the law. We're getting our butts kicked. And this, I'm going to leave this, I'm going to change the tone and say to the students here, this is your moment. This is your moment for creativity. We've got to do a lot of learning, a lot of listening, a lot of failing along the way. And I've had plenty of failures, not just the butt kicking, but not everything goes well over the course of a career. There's down times, there's up times. This is a downtime for women's rights, women's liberty, women's fundamental sense of self and control over our lives. What are we going to do about it? What is your generation going to do about it? One of the things I love about teaching at Berkeley Law is, and I'm just going to speak personally, you're all brilliant. You didn't get here if you weren't brilliant. And I see it in my classroom every single day. People want to learn. They're going deeper and deeper so they can understand more fully. There's respectful dialogue across the classroom. There's brilliance in the writing. There's brilliance in the questions. And I want to leave on a note of leadership. Leadership is not just one thing. Leadership is a team sport. We need each other to be able to make it through this moment, to get to the other side, to reestablish a respect for half the population. Everybody has a role to play. Everybody is a leader. Find your voice and find your joy. And I want to echo, what makes you happy in the law is what we need. Where is the joy in your life, in your heart? How can you build that by having a mission for your own life and using your tools as a lawyer to fulfill that mission? Don't be afraid of what you're going to face. It's not all going to be fun. You will get your butt kicked. But when you do, take that on as a moment of learning and of creativity and growth, and let that guide you through the ups and downs of your career. And I'll leave you.